The time it happened, no one at Huxley and Rowe could quite believe what unfolded. It was the quarterly strategy meeting, the one where department heads boasted about numbers and suits sharpened their claws. But that day, something strange disrupted the routine rhythm. It wasn't a fire drill or a security breach. No, it was the janitor, quiet, invisible, forgettable, stepping to the front of the executive boardroom like he belonged there. The same man people snickered at for wearing off-brand sneakers and eating from reused containers. The same man they'd mocked in the hallways. The same man they didn't even know by name. Something was off from the moment the meeting started. The projector flickered to life and displayed a title slide. Proposed structural overhaul. A plan to save $12.7 million. Gasps echoed across the room. The director of operations hadn't submitted anything remotely like this. Confused glances were exchanged. The vice president of finance flipped through his binder. No such proposal. Then a soft voice spoke from the back of the room. "That's my file." Every head turned. And there he was, Jamal, the janitor with the old mop cart and duct-taped headphones. He stood at the door, not in his usual stained coveralls, but in a pressed blue Oxford shirt, slacks, and the same worn sneakers. People blinked like they were seeing a ghost. The regional manager, Mr. Landon, scoffed. "This isn't funny. Security?" But no one moved, not because they respected him, but because no one could understand how this was happening. And that's when the real story began. In the weeks leading up to that meeting, strange things had started happening around the office. Someone had been correcting errors in financial reports before they hit management's desks. Memos were mysteriously rerouted to the right departments before anyone could catch the initial mistakes. Even the broken server closet fan had somehow been repaired, despite IT claiming they'd ordered the part 2 weeks ago. Nobody had connected the dots. Jamal had always moved quietly, head down, sweeping floors at odd hours, humming soft jazz under his breath. But he wasn't just cleaning. He was listening, watching, learning. Every night, when the building emptied out, he used discarded printouts to teach himself the company's inner workings. Every misprinted spreadsheet, every tossed memo became part of a mental jigsaw puzzle he was slowly piecing together. And it wasn't just about knowing things. It was about understanding what no one else bothered to see. He'd been there 6 years. 6 years of invisible labor, of overhearing boardroom betrayals while changing the trash, of reading the signs of failing investments in forgotten PowerPoints, of hearing executives talk openly in elevators as if no one were present. He's just the janitor. That's what they'd always said. But they didn't know Jamal had once been a top finance student, that he'd had to drop out when his younger sister got sick, that he'd taken the janitor job because it was the only position that let him work nights and care for her during the day. He sacrificed everything, and now he was done hiding. He stepped fully into the boardroom and plugged in a flash drive. The projector lit up with a detailed plan, spreadsheets, charts, fiscal forecasts, all broken down in a way none of the execs had managed in months. It was flawless. He exposed departments bleeding money through duplicated contracts, exposed a mid-level director skimming off travel expenses, even caught a shell company charging the firm rent for a floor they didn't use. The room was dead silent. "This is absurd," Mr. Landon barked, face flushed. "You expect us to believe you? What? Moonlight as a financial analyst while mopping our floors?" Jamal didn't answer. He just clicked to the next slide. A timeline of internal decisions cross-referenced with public records, receipts, and internal email timestamps. He had proof. And suddenly, everyone started sweating. The inconsistencies mounted. Procurement budgets that didn't add up. Backdated invoices. Confidential memos that mysteriously aligned with stock dips. Someone had been leaking internal information. Jamal highlighted one such incident, flagged under the IT department's blind spot. A marketing executive turned ghost. No explanation, no follow-up. He didn't point fingers. He didn't need to. The facts said it all. Half the table looked ready to bolt. The other half stared at Jamal like he'd grown wings. One of the senior partners, a stone-faced woman named Claudia Hastings, leaned forward. "How long have you been compiling this?" she asked, her voice low. 3 years, Jamal replied calmly. "I was just waiting for the right moment. You all gave it to me." Security didn't move. HR didn't speak. Legal shifted uncomfortably. But Jamal had already flipped the game board. He pulled out a manila envelope. Inside were printed emails between a former CFO and an external investor, ones that predated a massive layoff and hinted that someone had bet on the company's fall. Insider trading. Claudia opened the envelope and scanned the pages. Her eyes narrowed. "Where did you get these?" she asked sharply. Jamal looked at her. "From the shred bin you left unlocked." Another beat of silence. The air was thick, suffocating. But the final slide wasn't a takedown. It was a proposal, a genuine plan to fix everything, streamline costs, reroute funding to neglected departments, and restore ethics to the leadership structure. It was bold, clear, powerful. "I'm not here to take anyone's job," Jamal said. "I'm here to make sure this company doesn't burn from the inside out." The room sat stunned. But just as Claudia began to respond, a loud buzz cut through the boardroom. Someone's phone, vibrating on the table. It was the head of legal. He picked it up, paled instantly, and stood without a word. One by one, other phones started going off. The company's stock had just surged. Someone had leaked the restructuring proposal to the press. The story was breaking live. CNBC Bloomberg. Anonymous internal whistleblower proposes $12.7 million turnaround plan at Huxley and Rowe. Jamal hadn't sent it. The real twist? Someone else had. Someone on the inside. Someone who wanted him to be seen. And now, reporters were at the gates. Cameras. Microphones. The CEO, who'd been traveling abroad, was on a flight back, reportedly furious. And as security finally approached Jamal, this time not to remove him, but to escort him safely away from the storm, he paused at the door and turned to the stunned executives. "Check the server logs," he said calmly. "You'll find who really tried to bury the truth." Then he left, flanked by 2 stunned security officers, down the same hallway where people used to laugh at him. The same hallway where, just days ago, someone had deliberately spilled coffee in front of him and joked that he'd never rise above his mop. But now, the whole building was talking. Whispers. Panic. The story wasn't over. Because what Jamal hadn't told them was that this was only phase 1. Part 2 was already in motion. And someone in that room, someone sitting silently, had helped him orchestrate the entire thing. By the time Jamal reached the building's ground floor, the glass lobby had turned into a war zone of flashbulbs and reporters yelling questions from behind security barricades. It was chaos. "Sir, are you the whistleblower? Did you write the proposal yourself? Are you being offered an executive position?" Jamal said nothing. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just walked calmly through the storm he had created, eyes forward, flanked by 2 men who once wouldn't give him the time of day. But he knew the real storm was still upstairs. Back in the boardroom, silence gave way to pandemonium. Claudia Hastings stood at the head of the table, her knuckles white as she gripped the manila folder. The VP of Finance, Dale Mercer, was frantically typing on his laptop, trying to access internal files. But half the drives had been locked. Someone had restricted permissions. The IT director was on speakerphone trying to explain why their security protocols had been bypassed. Legal was quietly slipping out of the room, phones pressed to ears. Everyone had the same question. Who helped Jamal? Because there was no way he'd done all this alone. Claudia knew it. Jamal was smart, clearly brilliant, but no one could gain this kind of access without help. Someone had handed him the keys, and whoever it was still sitting at that table, pretending to be just as surprised as the rest of them. In the next 24 hours, the building changed. HR issued a statement calling Jamal's actions a demonstration of initiative and insight, trying to steer public opinion. The CEO, a cold, rarely seen man named Richard Vale, had landed in New York and was demanding emergency meetings. An internal audit team was dispatched. Legal was scrambling to find a scapegoat. And then something stranger happened. Jamal didn't come back. He declined media interviews, turned down speaking offers. He didn't respond to corporate emails. In fact, no one knew where he was. The badge scans showed he hadn't returned to the building. His tiny one-bedroom apartment in Queens had been emptied out. Landlord said he'd moved out that same night. Left a handwritten note that simply said, "You'll want to change the locks." Whispers turned to paranoia. Someone started a theory that he'd been paid off. Others said he was a government plant. A few feared he'd been silenced. But Claudia Hastings knew better. She knew the look in his eye that day. That was not a man who was finished. That was a man setting up the next phase. So she started digging. She began at the building's security footage archives, something she had oversight of as a senior partner. She watched footage from the past 6 months, scanned hours of tape showing Jamal pushing his mop cart through endless floors. But then she noticed something. One night, April 9th, he didn't push the cart into the executive suite. He pushed a rolling toolbox, a maintenance badge, not janitorial, and someone else was with him. A woman, petite, late 20s maybe, dark ponytail, glasses. She wore a visitor's badge and a brown UPS windbreaker, nothing that would raise suspicion. But her body language didn't match a delivery driver. She knew exactly where the cameras were and made a point not to look at any of them. Claudia paused the footage, zoomed in. The name tag said, Yvonne. That name didn't exist in the building's visitor logs. She dug further, pulled badge scans. Fake. Traced the badge ID. It matched a terminated employee from 2 years ago. Whoever she was, she'd been inside at least 5 times in the past 3 months. Now the fear wasn't just that Jamal had help. It was that he'd orchestrated something larger, something systemic, and someone inside had buried the trail. 3 days later, a folder arrived at Claudia's private residence. No return address, no postmark. Inside were 5 photographs. Each showed someone inside the company, mid-tier employees, meeting with a figure outside Huxley and Row at various city locations. Park benches, cafes, train stations. One of the people photographed was Dale Mercer. In one image, he handed over what looked like a flash drive. The final image was a photo of Claudia herself, 3 years prior, meeting with Richard Vale in a hotel conference room. The timestamp was a day after the previous CEO's sudden resignation. That was the first time Claudia truly felt afraid. She realized now, Jamal hadn't just exposed corruption. He had been inside their entire ecosystem for years. He had evidence that could destroy not just careers, but reputations, legacy, power. And then came the email, from an encrypted address. Subject, "You're not the target, but you are a piece." Attached was a single PDF file. No password protection, no title. Just 82 pages of internal documents, communications, and financial trails. They didn't just implicate Richard Vale. They traced his offshore accounts, showed transactions funneled through subsidiaries that were designed to bleed Huxley and Row dry. The final page was a spreadsheet labeled Phase 2, Internal Disruption Schedule. Beside each department was a set of dates, timed precisely to meetings, audits, budget renewals. And the first one was happening in 48 hours. Claudia stared at her monitor, heart pounding. This wasn't revenge. This was a full-scale collapse plan. Surgical. Intentional. She called Richard Vale. Voicemail. She tried legal. No answer. Everyone had gone silent. People were already protecting themselves. Then came the breaking news. A second whistleblower file had dropped, this time with recordings. Conversations between Richard and external investors. One clip included him saying, "Let the company burn. I'll be in Zurich before the flames reach the lobby." That was it. Within an hour, Richard Vail resigned. He was escorted off his private jet in Geneva. The board held an emergency vote. Shareholders threatened lawsuits. Employees walked out. 3 senior directors were placed on administrative leave. And amid the chaos, Claudia received one last email. This one was personal. No attachment, just text. I never wanted to be part of your world. I only wanted to make sure people like you never destroyed it for everyone else. I wasn't alone. I'm still not. The building may recover, but the trust won't. That's the cost. That's always the cost. No name, no signature, but she knew. The janitor they laughed at had become a ghost, one they couldn't track, couldn't bribe, couldn't silence. In less than a week, he'd dismantled a decades-old power structure from the inside. And the thing no one could figure out was this. What did he want? He didn't take a job offer. He didn't cash in. He didn't sell the files or sign a book deal or start a movement. He just vanished. Until, 1 month later, at a youth financial literacy event in Brooklyn, a familiar face appeared on a panel. No fanfare, no headlines. Just a man in a gray hoodie, speaking to kids about budgeting, saving, and building something no one could ever take from you. Sometimes, he said quietly, you've got to go into a broken system just to show others where the cracks are. Someone in the audience recognized him. Whispers started again, but Jamal simply stood, thanked the crowd, and disappeared into the city. And somewhere, in the heart of a collapsing empire, the last remnants of old power finally realized. They hadn't been watching the janitor. The janitor had been watching them. The story ended not with an arrest or a promotion or a public apology. It ended with the one thing they could never control: truth. And the people willing to risk everything to expose it.